What's going on YouTube? Magnus here, back with another video for you guys. Today we are making a belt quiver with some knotwork on it. Remember that you can get all the patterns and artwork for my projects on my website, link in the description down below. Probably put a link right here for you guys as well. You can also get the same patterns and artwork on the month I release them on my Patreon. It's a really good deal. You should at least have a look at that. Link in the description down below. Let's get started. Once again, this video is sponsored by LONSDALE Leather, where you can get all sorts of tools, supplies, and of course, leather. Check them out in the description down below. So this pattern obviously has a lot of pages, so let's get to cutting everything out and taping it all together. For this video, we're going to be taping the pattern directly to our leather. I've seen a few other makers do this, and it really helps with hand stitching patterns because the hole placement sometimes has to be pretty precise, and this gets you a really precise placement on your holes. This might not be for everybody, but I figured it would be a good one to do for this video. These straps that we're cutting out here are sized to me. The hole placement and button studs are all sized to me, so you may want to adjust it. So keep that in mind. Experiment a little bit. So once we've got this all taped together, we're going to cut it out, but leave a little bit of space around the edge. This is because when we tape it down, we want to have a nice line to be able to cut through the paper and cut our pattern out. So just keep that in mind. This, again, might not be for everybody, but I think this is a really good way of doing things, and I've seen a lot of other people do it, so we're going to give it a shot here. I'm using some 5 to 6 ounce Vegetan here. I like to use pre-dyed leather unless I'm carving it, and I'm going to be carving this piece, so we're using Vegetan. LONSDALE has lots of great options for Vegetan. This is one of them. Obviously, for this whole plan to work, you have to be able to see through your tape, so keep that in mind when you're doing it. But it worked out really well. These holes here I punched small because I wasn't exactly sure how I was putting it together yet. This was kind of an experimentation process. The leather is pretty thin and we're cutting through paper, but I wanted this to be really sharp because of the paper. I didn't want to squish it and move it awkwardly because I want to keep the pattern perfect as we cut it out. So there are a bunch of different ways you could fasten this to your belt. These straps and button studs is what I'm going to do. Again, what I was telling you earlier is you may want to adjust the length of these. You could use buckles, you could use snaps. There's all sorts of options. I went with button studs because I like button studs, and we'll see how it looks in the end. I just made the straps kind of fancy. You can do whatever you want, obviously. After our pieces are all cut out, it is time to bevel them. We're beveling both sides of a lot of them, but the main body of the quiver, we're only going to bevel both sides of the top because we want the stitched edge to look like a single edge, so we don't want to bevel both sides. We just want to bevel the top of that area. I think I'm being a little more complicated in my explanation than I need to be. I'll show you in a bit, and then I'll explain it. So here we are finishing the bevel on the top of the main body of the quiver. After we're done that, I'm going to mark some lines that are on the pattern to just do a small section at the top of the quiver on its back, beveling the back. So we're going to have a rounded edge around the opening where the arrows go into, but everything else is going to be, that it's going to be stitched together, will be a single rounded edge. I'm still not sure if I'm explaining this well enough, but I'm sure you guys understand. Occasionally I like to do some leather carving on my projects, so here's the knot I drew for this quiver. We got to transfer it to some tracing film. You can use a laser printer to print this kind of stuff, but it was a large pattern, so I decided to just trace it with a Sharpie. I'm not sure how much it helps, but I tend to wet the whole piece that I'm going to carve, even if I'm only carving part of it. I want it to like be a nice even color, and in my head I feel like it's going to streak. Maybe it wouldn't, I don't know. Now a quick transfer with the stylus. And then after we've got this done, it's on to swivel knife. I've got links to various carving tools on my website and Amazon storefront. There's links in the description of this video for you guys if that's your thing. A lot of people say don't sharpen a ceramic blade. I've never had any issue with it. It's always cut better when I've done it, so I don't see what the big deal is. I think people just heard something once and they want to freak out over it every time they see me doing it. But as long as it keeps making it cut better, I'm going to keep doing it. So now I'm just going to bevel all of these lines like crazy. And we're going to fast forward it a lot right now. I don't usually use a textured beveler, so this is a little different, but I of course will have this linked in the description of the video if it's one of the tools that you're interested in picking up. I decided to add some texture as well around this knot and near the bevels, so we're using this stamp and a smaller version of this stamp. I'll link them as well in the description of the video. Just adds a little something something, you know? A little something different. If you want to learn to shoot a bow and are near Vancouver, Canada, you should check out Lycopish Archery. They're a traditional and historical archery school. They're the only school that teaches the 4 academic classifications of archery: lithic, composite, flatbow, and longbow. Not only does Lycopish offer weekly classes on how to shoot a bow, they also offer classes on boyery, arrowsmithing, arrow crusting, and all sorts of other things that I know absolutely nothing about. They even have a full retail store. Link in the description down below. Maybe I'll put a link right here for you guys. Thanks. So pro dye goes on super even, but also fairly light. Once you add an oil or a finish to it, it'll darken it up. And I want to avoid streaking as much as possible because I'm painting around the knot. So pro dye helps with that a lot. Don't forget these pieces, dye them as well. A lot easier, don't have to worry about the streaking as much, just dye them a ton. Do the back too. Make everything mostly uniform. Now we're hitting it with a resist, which is an acrylic resin. It's also a finish, because I'm going to do some antique staining to this carving to make it blend really nicely, because as it is right now, with all the painting and little minuscule imperfections, it really doesn't look as good in close up as it looks right now. So once our resist has dried, we're gonna put, what color is that? Who knows? What year is that bottle from? I always try and put on as little. Yeah, it's still too much. Occasionally I get it right, but this is still too much antique stain. Now our resist is going to stop it from dyeing our leather, but it's also going to make sure that it gets into all the cracks and crevices of this piece, which blends everything together. And then once it's dried, we're going to hit it with this last coat of finish, and that'll seal everything in. I'm doing the backs of these just to darken them up a bit as well. And then I decided to add this part, which we should have punched earlier, but we're punching it now. They are separators for the arrows to make it sit nicer in the quiver. Now we're going to do our burnishing, throw some wax on the edges of all our dyed pieces, and then there's a couple options for burnishing. Well, not just a couple, there's multiple options. There's different tools, but there's use your hand or use a powered device. So, and in hindsight, I think I did this before last video too. You probably should do your edges before you put a finish on it, because when you're rubbing along, you may remove the finish on the top edge as you're burnishing it. So, yeah, do your edges first. Yes, and then put your finish on. Now here's that spot where I'm just burnishing the top edge. Once we've stitched everything together, then we're going to burnish the edge where all the stitching is, just to give it that nice, complete, hidden seam kind of look. Here's our little dividers, and I just kind of jury-rigged this up. It'll be different in the pattern, but we're just going to hand stitch those onto the piece after it's stitched together. Because I decided to use Chicago screws and button studs for this project, I'm using some thread lock to make sure they don't come apart. I chose a Chicago screw just because I thought it was a nice strong item to put at the top of the quiver. You can probably get away with the rivet, I'm not sure, but Chicago screws are great. You might as well start using them if you haven't been using them before. Now that both these parts are put on, because you can't access them otherwise, we can stitch it together. Here's a button stud punch. You don't need to buy a button stud punch. You can just punch a hole and then cut it, but I like my little button stud punches. Now when we're sewing the bottom on, we start one hole away from the edge of the main body. It's just how I designed it. You'll see here. You can just see there. I'm one hole away from the edge. And we're going to go all the way around. And once that's stitched together, we're going to stitch all the way up to the end. You may be looking at this here and thinking it looks like a complicated, masterful weave of stitching. It really is me just winging it and making sure that it goes together. So I just kind of look at it and stitch it. So I'm sure somebody was ready to post a comment about how this part is stitched. It just stitch together. It's really not that complicated. It's go in the hole, out the hole, pull the threads tight, and you're good. This is not a saddle stitch or a lock stitch or any kind of weird stitch. It's just a running stitch. Quite often you'll see I go ahead with one side a few stitches and then I catch up with the other side. It's nothing complicated. The only thing you have to make sure of is that when you come through with the second thread, that you don't go through the other thread with the needle, because that kind of gets a little weird. So we got into this point, which is just before the opening. So I backstitch a couple times and then I go forward again. But this time when I go forward, I'm not going through both pieces of leather, I'm just going through the one side. So I'm going to go all the way around, backstitch a little bit, and then I'm going to take the other half and go all the way back the other way, backstitch a little bit, burn the threads, and that part's done. And some of you may be wondering why I did this at all. It's not joining anything together. I did it because it looks cool. That's the only reason I did it. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to. You don't have to do extra. I thought this little 5-hole deal I had going on with these arrow separators would look really cool. It kind of looks like a little blob, honestly. I'm not sure if I'll change it on the pattern, but just keep that in mind. Maybe you want to do something else. It could even be a rivet if you're feeling like just riveting it. You could put a rivet in there, I guess. Now we're just throwing some wax down, and this is our burnished hidden seam I was rambling on about earlier, or not so hidden seam. At least it looks kind of hidden when it's done. You'd have to look up close. I flip over my burnisher and burnish it flat a bit, and round a bit, and flat a bit, and round a bit, and eventually I get the desired look that I want. This is another meism. You don't have to use solid brass peening rivets. I just think they're really cool, so I use them all the time. You can probably just use a strong, rapid rivet of some kind, or a Chicago screw or something. I just like those rivets, and I'm going to keep using them, and then reminding you guys that you don't have to use them. Just a reminder that this is being sized for where I thought it would be nice on my belt and the angle that I wanted it for me. So, you know, you may have to adjust the strap length, and you may have to adjust where you put the button studs. This one specifically because it'll change the angle of the strap a lot. But this worked out for me just fine. Maybe it'll work out for you. Experiment, but don't put your Loctite in until you're sure.
I love and hate that there's so much space on this quiver for leather carving. I think it turned out amazing, but that simple knot, it took a little bit of time, but sometimes you just gotta be patient. Make sure you like this video if you enjoyed it. It takes like 2 seconds. Could have already done it. It really helps the video out. It helps the channel grow. Make sure you subscribe for future content. Hit that notification button so you don't miss any of my videos. And until next time, keep on being creative in whatever it is you do.